Well, hello everybody and welcome to another live. Of course, with the chops and changes of time, so the UK's changed their clocks overnight, Saturday into Sunday, so that now means we're only 4 hours difference with the East Coast and 7 hours with the West Coast in the US, and whatever else that means depending on when you're changing. Of course, the US changing next weekend. So anyway, hopefully people made it. There's quite a few people here. I've seen lots of questions around what time does it start and so on. But anyway, we're here and hopefully loads of people join, lots of questions coming in. So just a reminder, I'm Gary Bembridge. I was just the wrong way around. I'm Gary Bembridge. This is Tips for Travelers. If you have got a question on cruising, anything that's going on, travel, pop it in the comments and write the word question so that I know it's a question rather than a chat. There's been good chat already. If you're watching this afterwards, thanks very much. Thousands of people watching afterwards, which is great. And you can sort of scan through and see the questions as they come up if you want to jump ahead of that. So let's have a quick, there's a few housekeeping things that I want to do on top of the questions bit before we start. Just to let you know that next week, there will be no live next weekend, but there will be the weekend after. The reason for that is a week today, I will be boarding a Regent Splendor for a 15-night Caribbean cruise. I was due to be doing West Africa, but I think I explained in the previous trip why I'm not doing that, and I've switched it to this trip. So I'm actually heading to New York on Wednesday. I'll be there for a couple of nights, seeing some shows that I wanted to see, and catching up with some friends, and then heading off. So next Sunday, because I'm boarding, I won't run a live, but I will be running a live the next Sunday. We'll actually be in St. Lucia in 2 Sundays' time. So I'll try and run that at normal time, whatever the normal time is, 5 UK, 1 whatever is noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific time. So I'll try and synchronize with whatever that timing is to run that. So just remember, no live next week. If you do want to follow me on the trip, if you follow me on Instagram, Gary Bembridge, I post loads and loads of stories every day. So there's little video things, so keep a look up for the videos. I post hundreds of those with what's going on, the ports, the ship, and so on. If you want even more, what I also do for patrons is I have a Patreon account where I post some behind the scenes stuff of the channel, early releases of videos, stuff like that. But normally when I'm away, I try, subject to Wi-Fi, I post some kind of thoughts on the go, so some insights, answer some questions. Obviously, coming afterwards will be the full video. So just remind you, on the Tips for Travelers channel, I have the weekly video, these live streams, the shorts, etc. That's all that I've done always. That's always completely free or ad supported. And then I have the Patreon, which is there. So I do sort of a bit more behind the scenes stuff. But as I said, you can, of course, have a look on Instagram. Right, so let's get stuck into the questions. Loads of questions which is coming in, which is good. So let's get stuck in. I'll try and get through as many questions as possible in the next hour. So Michael is asking a question. Good to see you here again, Michael. Having never been on a repositioning cruise myself, are you a fan of these and the many relaxing days at sea, or do you prefer more focused itineraries that provide a port every day? So Michael, that's a great question, partly because it tees up a video series that I'm going to be launching. So the first video is actually out on the 8th. So in fact, I guess that's the date of the next live, the day before the live stream, looking at repositioning cruises, what they are, pros, cons, the different types, how to find them, watch outs, and so on. And then I've got a kind of a myths video, which will come a bit later. So keep an eye out for that as well, because I dive into that. Personally, I like repositioning cruises because I like spending longer times on a ship. So I particularly choose ships or lines that I want to just spend a bit more time on. It gives me time to try everything, experience everything, video everything without the time pressure. What I like about them, I personally like the more exotic ones. So for example, the one that I did on Silver Nova, where I went from Alaska to Japan, for example, because you get to see some very unusual combinations of ports. I do have some next year, which are more traditional transatlantics, going between Lisbon and Miami, for example. And I had another one which goes from Lisbon around down through New York, through Canada and New York and stuff. But in 27, I've booked some which go from Papeete through to Alaska to Japan. So I like them because you can also get combinations of unusual itineraries, and they are normally significantly cheaper than going on those lines. You can often go on a better line or a better cabin. But you're right, you do need to like sea days. For example, on that last one, we had 6 sea days back to back. One of them doing 8 sea days. And some people just were getting a bit crazy on that because there was just too many sea days. So I like a combinations of those. So I do like those repositionings. If I wasn't doing the channel, I'm doing fewer cruises, I probably would still do repositionings because I like sea days, and it would give me a chance for longer cruises, and it's definitely much more cost effective. Sherry is here, which is great. Yeah, it's also really cold here in the UK. Going to look into some of your Tokyo excursions. Thanks for discount code. So that's a good point, Sherry. So just if you are ever looking for alternative excursions, by the way, let me bring this up. If you're ever looking for alternative excursions, and there's obviously this venture, I just realized that should be me there. I didn't do it with a blank background. But if you're ever looking, there's Viator, obviously, there's Venture Shore. But if you do Tips for Travelers Shore Excursions, that's the Shore Excursions group, and you use the code TFT5, you will get you'll get 5% off the tours. So thanks for mentioning that, Sherry. So hopefully that works out. That works out for you. Let's have a look. So Tom is here, who's actually one of my Captain patrons. We're approaching 6 months for early May 2026 Tahiti trip. 3 days on Maria, which is fantastic. I think I might have mentioned that before, is Maria, which is maybe a 45-minute ferry ride on the fast ferry. I find a nicer place to stay than staying in Papeete. Paul Gauguin is a fabulous cruise. Any recommendations for activities and adventures? So I'm not sure if you asked me for Maria or Paul Gauguin more generally. What I would strongly recommend is most of those islands have great e-bike tours. Either you can hire e-bikes. So for example, Mark and I had an e-bike and we cycled the whole way around Bora Bora. We've done them in Maria, we've done them in Huani. There's some great e-bike tours which you can do through Paul Gauguin, or you can do them separately. They're really interesting because you'll see some of the historic sites, you'll see things like the pineapple plantations, you'll go up to viewing sites. And the other thing, of course, is a lot of it's about the water. So there's some great excursions with kind of snorkeling, swimming with sharks, that kind of stuff. And if you like hiking, there's a couple of good hikes. Now, I think it's in Huani, if I remember correctly, there's a huge big mountain. Now, you can get an ATV up there, or you can hike up, which is fantastic. So kind of water-based stuff. A lot of them will have private beaches. Paul Gauguin has, for example, on one of the islands, they have their private motu. I wouldn't do an excursion that day. I would just go to the island. It's really nice. In Bora Bora, they have a little private beach space and stuff like that as well. Michael has a follow-up question from last week. I think you asked me about ones that I would do again. So Michael this time's asking me, would I only do once, one and done, no repeat necessary? There aren't any that came to mind, Michael. One thing that I do probably do fewer of, and I do tend to look at less, is Mediterranean trips, mostly because I've done a lot of Mediterranean cruises. Also, over the years, I've been to many of those places kind of on land-based stuff as well. So it's more that I don't find things new and exciting. So the only time I do it is if there is something new and exciting. So for example, I'm doing a Mediterranean cruise in May next year, but I'm doing that on Windstar Windsurf because it's the sailing ship thing. So it's more about the sailing ship experience. So I don't think, in terms of cruises, one that I probably wouldn't do again is Galapagos. I always wanted to go to Galapagos. I did it. I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't go again. I feel like that's one I've done. But other expedition ones I've done, maybe, would I go to the Kimberley again? I might go to the Kimberley again. Maybe I wouldn't go to the Kimberley again. So some of those excursion ones, partly because they're so expensive, but like Antarctica, I'm going yet again, seeing a different part of it. So probably some of the expedition ones I would do once, partly because I feel I've done them, but also they are so horribly, horribly expensive. So you need to, I'd rather try somewhere else. Heidi has a question. Going on holiday in America to near Antarctica, how rough is Drake Passage and how long to cross? So I'm guessing, Heidi, you might be doing them in Amsterdam. I'm guessing because I know they do that. They bounce between Santiago. Well, I guess it's more like, it used to be Valparaiso, but now it's, I forgotten what it's called, and Buenos Aires. I did that once, and there's some that'll go down to Antarctica. I'm actually doing the Amsterdam next year, but I'm doing, I guess, when they're finishing the season, I'm going from Buenos Aires all the way around back through ultimately to Miami. Anyway, that's what you asked. So in terms of Drake Passage, I mean, Drake Passage, Heidi, is relatively unpredictable. It can be what they call the Drake Lake or the Drake Shake. So I suspect, particularly when they're heading there on Ostend, they will try, as also the expedition ships do, try and go when there's less storms passing through. It's a little bit less rough for everybody's sake, but also just because that's much more pleasant. So it can be pretty choppy. But also, I think someone made the comment, a lot of how long it takes depends on how rough it is. So what you'll find often, you'll often find expedition ships will talk about taking 2 days to get there, but often it's taken us just over a day to get there if it's not that bouncy, because they can get there much quicker and they build a bit of buffer in. So it's going to take between 1 and 2 days normally, sitting on an expedition ship, which go about ships like the Amsterdam probably go about the same speed, I think. But what I would say with Drake Passage is don't get too stressed about it. Now, you're on a slightly bigger ship, so probably in terms of motion than some of the small expedition, a little bit less so. They will try and time it so it's going to be as most comfortable as possible, and just make sure that you're ready. So whatever remedies or whatever you have, just have those with you, and don't worry too much about it, because they will go when they can try and make it the most comfortable as possible. But I have been on it when it's pretty choppy, and I've been on it when it's relatively smooth. Have a great time. So see the world with us. Good to see you here again. With cruise fares ever increasing, which mode of cruising now offers the best value for money? Ocean, river, expedition, yacht, or barge? Without a shadow of a doubt, in terms of value, it's ocean. See the world, because you can go still relatively inexpensively. You're right, fares are going up, ships are selling pretty full, and they're selling still way out into 26, 27, and sales are going really well, according to the lines. But ocean, you can still go on some of those mega ships, MSC, you can still get deals, as little as $100, $200, per person per night still. So that is definitely kind of the best value, just because, the way they balance costs. Personally, I find river cruising, I struggle a little bit with the value of river cruising. Personally, I know there are more value ones coming, but on the price per day, it's pretty hefty. Now, I know there's more inclusions, it's a smaller ship, that kind of stuff. So they're okay. I mean, the good news is, because there's more value entrants coming in, more competition, more availability, I think that will improve. Expedition obviously is incredible value for what you see. So although going to Antarctica is crazy money, but the value is incredible for what you get, the expedition team, the learning, the experience. Barge, you can get some relatively inexpensive barge stuff like Cross Europe, for example, which I've been on. But definitely, of those, ocean is always going to be, in terms of the value, what you get for the amount of money you spend, of course, on expedition, for me anyway, is pretty amazing. So Lenny is here listening while traveling. I guess that means you're on the go. And Mark is here, which is great. Good to see you here, Mark. Tom is on YouTube. So I saw that more as I think I mentioned, I do stream this on Facebook and on LinkedIn. The disadvantage with those is you can't see the chat. The advantage on YouTube is you can see the chat. But if you leave a question, if you are watching on Facebook, on LinkedIn, if you leave a question, the questions do show up. Gary, loving the channel, thank you very much. Wu-Tang Life, YouTube is 20, it was late with the live alert. That's interesting. It's sometimes a little bit hectic. Scorfman, in the middle of the Atlantic on Celebrity Apex to Bermuda, then Port Canaveral on Saturday, watching the hurricane. Yeah, I was watching the news today, actually, because you've got hurricane, I'm going to what it's called now, that's heading towards Jamaica. I was watching the news, they're kind of getting ready for it to hit Jamaica, and getting sandbags, etc., out, ready for that. It sounds like they're expecting it to be pretty not great at all in Jamaica. So hopefully it's not too bad for you. I'm sort of watching. I know there's something passing through this week, as I mentioned, because I'm on those cruises. That cruise that leaves a week today. I'm sort of waiting to see if there's any storms heading up. I haven't seen any. People made a comment, am I worried about hurricanes? I haven't seen any. And the weather forward, I can only look at the moment just a little bit ahead, and it seems not as stormy, but we will see. Hopefully, it's still towards, I guess, towards the end of the hurricane season. There's still the risk, but yeah, hopefully that goes well for you, and hopefully you're enjoying Celebrity Apex. Our boys at Boca are here, which is great. When cruising out of Barbados, what pre-cruise hotel do you recommend? Any must-see sites? Thanks, Gary. So when I've pre-cruised, I've actually flown in the same day on a charter and flown out. But when we stayed in Barbados, we stayed at the Fairmont, which was very nice. But that's more if you're staying longer. One of the ones that I personally would have on my list as a pre-cruise is the Hilton, which is sort of out on a little sticky out bit. I'm sure there's a more technical term for that, but it's still got pretty good beaches from what I can see. It's pretty accessible, not that far from the port. So I would take a look at the Hilton. But as we said at the Fairmont before, which is a very nice hotel, nice beaches, if you wanted more of a chill out space. In terms of must-see sites in Barbados, now, most of I've been to Barbados, to be honest, I've done more beach stuff. But I'm trying to remember and I've done more beach and snorkeling stuff. So I don't have a lot of list of sites. The town is kind of a little bit grubby and stuff, but I've mostly done beach snorkeling. They're quite well known for turtles and stuff. So I'm pretty rubbish on sites in Barbados. I've done that more. In fact, we're going to Barbados on this trip, and I actually am planning to go to kind of the beach. So I'm a bit rubbish on that. So if anyone has better tips, I mean, I've strolled around the town. There's quite a nice little marina and stuff, but I think you probably want to see more than that. So if anyone has better tips than I do, please leave those, because I feel it's a rubbish job for boys of Boco. So Sherry's saying it should be long gone by the time I get there, so that should be good. Greg. So Greg, who do you use to obtain visas for countries like India? So Greg, I often will these days do visas myself. So I will just go online. Normally I'll go to, like in the UK, I'll look at the Foreign Office site. It'll give you entry requirements, and it'll give you a link to the most appropriate, embassy site or whatever. So like when I got a visa for China, even though I didn't really need it recently, when I sailed there, because they changed the rules slightly, I would often do it myself. However, the company that is most strongly recommended by cruise companies, but also I see for land-based, is a company called CIBT. CIBT, and I think pretty much they're in many, many countries of the world. So often if you type in cibt.com, it redirects you to the local site. So certainly when we did a big leg of, we did half the world cruise. No, actually, it's not. I'm talking rubbish. It's when we were doing, we were going on the Queen Mary 2, I'm in there, from Sydney all the way up to Dubai. We needed a couple of countries we're going to, we needed visas for. And we did them through CIBT there, because you could you fill out all your forms through the CIBT for the different countries. I think it was, at the time, I think we had to get Vietnam, we had to get China, a few other, I can't remember what other places we had to get. There was 3 or 4 we had to get. So we did it all in one thing, and we could just give them, and they would get each of them individually. So it meant I didn't have to go to multiple places. But certainly if I was going to one country, I would do it myself. Now, the advantage I have is I'm in London. So all the embassies and all of the visa places are in London. So if you're not in London or a major city where you've got all of those consulates, then I would look at a company like CIBT. So hopefully that answers. DMAC3316 has Roatan Honduras removed the vaccination requirement? It was for measles. So there was a little bit of confusion around this issue about did you need it, didn't you need it? A lot of it was linked originally from the stuff that I read for people coming on land-based and wasn't applying to cruise people, but there was a lot of confusion. So my understanding, I'm going to give you a qualified understanding, is that it's gone, it's been clarified. However, what I would do is always, of course, double check. So one of the things you could do is, I'm not sure where you're based, any clues in the way, sometimes you can tell by spelling or pictures. But what I would always do, so for example, what I would do in the UK is I'd go to the Foreign Office. So I'd go to FCO, I just Google FCO Honduras entry requirements, and that would tell me the most current status. And the advantage with the FCO site is you can then set up an alert, so it will tell you if it's changed. If you're in the States, the State Department, I would do State Department travel advisory. In there, again, they will tell you entry requirements and stuff. So I would do a double check. There are also a couple of really good travel health sites, which I can't remember the name offhand, but literally if you do travel advice sites in Google, it'll come up. But I tend to use either the State Department or the Foreign Office because they are really on the ball. They're up to date because, of course, they don't want travelers from their country going and creating all sorts of problems, getting the embassies involved, whatever. And they do update them regularly. So that would be my tip. Gary asking, has cruise booking started to decline based on all the recent reports from the cruise lines? No, they are all reporting, and so every quarter, obviously, as listed companies, the major companies, groups, Carnival Group, the Caribbean Group, the Norwegian Group, and Viking, which are all listed, of course, on the New York Stock Exchange. Every quarter they do updates. They are not talking about bookings declining at all. A lot of them are talking about how the percentages they've sold of 26 already into 27 and how prices are going up. Obviously, bigger groups like MSC, which are privately owned, we don't know. So I haven't seen that. However, saying that, what I do have seen, particularly at the end of this last September quarter, is quite a lot of promotions and sales. Now we're heading into Black Friday, where the lines often do a lot of sales. So it'll be interesting to see how busy and what sort of deals they're offering. And the other big period for cruise lines is early January, when wave season is. So a large percent of people book travel just coming out of the Christmas period. So it'll be interesting to see just how much they're promoting. But certainly the cruise lines are reporting very robust. Now, I do keep an eye on it because obviously people are wondering, particularly with cost of living going up, inflation staying high, some people's nervous about traveling, and so on. But certainly they're not reporting any as yet, and they would obviously have to reflect that in quarterly reporting. But we haven't seen anything yet, so it will be interesting to see. Just remind, write the word question so that I don't miss the question. Couple here that haven't been, just write the word question so I don't miss the question. Tana Tridico, trying to decide between Windstar Windsurf and Regent Prestige for 2027 for Croatia and Greece cruising. Any thoughts? Okay, so those are obviously extremely different experiences. Obviously, Windsurf being the sailing ship, and Prestige, for those who don't know, is the new Regent ship that's coming out. So although, so Windstar is in that sort of small ship luxury experience. Windsurf I haven't been on, but I will be on in May. And they are doing a refit quite soon. Prestige, obviously, brand spanking new. It's kind of that ultra luxury thing. Tana, what I would do is, it depends a little bit, I would say, what you want to get out of the experience. Now, without knowing the itineraries, if you want a really immersive experience, so you want to get into some of the smaller ports, out of the way ports in Croatia, you want to go to some of the smaller islands, I would look very hard at the Windstar Windsurf. So even that itinerary that I'm doing out of Venice, we're calling on a couple of ports that even the smaller ships like Azamara, which are quite small, don't call on, because the Windsurf is so small, it's so nimble. They will pull and tendering is much less of an issue. So if you really want something more intensive, I would look at those, particularly if it's definitely going to get you into Santorini, Mykonos, places like that are restricting, or if you're going to some of the small islands, Patmos or whatever, some of the smaller islands, and you want a more unique experience. Now, it is going to cost you about the same as going on Regent, which I guess is why you're asking, because certainly my Windstar Windsurf, per day is kind of a Regent kind of price, but it's not as plush or luxurious. Now, if you're looking though for a much more upmarket, way more choice of dining options, probably much higher level of inclusions, definitely more pampering, and you want to be one of the first people to go on the new ship, I would look. That's the sell for Prestige. They unlikely, and again I haven't seen the itineraries, but I'm guessing they're not going to go to quite as intensive places, because that ship, if I remember correctly, is going to have 800 passengers, 850 passengers. So they're going to be likely going for more ports where they can dock. So you might find it's a little bit more of the iconic places. So I probably haven't helped you, but those are the sort of things I would kind of balance out. I think both would be great experience, but very, very different experiences. And now someone else had left a question. KB in the UK, there we go. Just off MSC Seaview around the Med and Yacht Club, very nice. Good, great to hear you had a great time. Going to do the Panama Canal on Celebrity Ascent in the retreat in January, very nice. That should take you through the new locks. We're 74 and 64, should we get yellow fever jabs? So obviously I'm not a doctor, but I haven't just been through this discussion. I could probably give you what my doctor and my oncologist told me is generally speaking, you'll see if you speak to a doctor or you even Google it, you'll find that generally speaking, yellow fever jabs are not recommended for people over the age of 60, certainly in the UK. And the reason being it's a live virus, and it can be kind of sort of side effects. So it's not recommended for people over 60. Both my doctor and my oncologist that I saw was adamant that I shouldn't have a yellow fever jab to do the West Africa trip, which it was sort of required. I decided not to go to West Africa because we were calling on some ports where yellow fever was a real issue. Now, you don't need a yellow fever jab to go through the Panama Canal. It's not required. It's not needed. I've been through Panama Canal 4 times. I'm going through twice next year, and I've never considered having the yellow fever jab. Again, I'm not a medical professional, so do kind of check, but you'll find that it's not required. No cruise line requires it. Panama doesn't require it, so it's not required. I think some sites, some travel sites, recommend it, suggest it. But certainly if you speak to any doctor, and I would speak to a doctor rather than a vaccination center selling those. I also spoke when I had some jabs recently, booster jabs. I asked them, and my GP doesn't even, they won't even offer the yellow fever jab at all, because particularly for people over 60, they won't do it at all. So short answer is obviously speak to your medical professional if you're concerned about it. The recommendation is not to take it over 60 is all the stuff that I've been told by my people. And thirdly, it's not a must-have. The ports we were calling on in West Africa, it was a must-have, although you could get a license from your doctor saying you shouldn't take it. By the way, one point is if you've ever had yellow fever jab, that is accepted as having had it. So I might have had it when I was a kid, but I don't have any record of it. But if you have had it, 20 years ago for some reason, and you can have documentation that's still counted as valid, which I didn't know, which is interesting. Caroline said, what about using different cruise topics on a monthly basis for live chats? I think it is a great idea. I tried it and it was a complete disaster. Well, not complete disaster. I did try to do themed chats, and I found that I would get 3 or 4 questions on the theme, and then people would ask what they wanted to ask, which of course is fair enough. So I did try it, and I will go back to trying it. It's a good reminder that I should try it. But I found, generally speaking, it just, because obviously this is driven by what people want to ask. What I'm doing though in November, I'm going to get, what I have done a couple of times is you have guests on so they get a different perspective. So Fraser at Sea is going to come in when I get back from this trip, for example. And what I was going to talk a little bit more about, that one we're going to focus, or try and focus, around longer cruises. He took a year off where basically pretty much was on ships non-stop. So I do like the idea, and I will keep trying it, because of course it does add a perspective, and it does mean, at least certainly at the beginning, we get people who want to watch that topic, I guess, come in at the beginning. So thanks for that suggestion. It's great. It's a great suggestion. Sherry making the same point that I did. Remind me to write the word question so I don't miss it. A big part of what I enjoy while I cruise is a free sauna. They're fast diminishing. Do you recommend some ships or cruise lines with good ones? So I'm not a big sauna fan, but yes, I can. So you tend to find, Gary, that unfortunately, the more upmarket you go, the more likely you to find it. So for example, Explorer Journeys has a very good sauna setup. Region 7 Seas had a good setup where you didn't have to pay. But you're right, on the more mass markets, so on Cunard, Holland America, and so on, you have to pay to go into that sort of area. in many of the ships. Now, I know on Queen Elizabeth, for example, and Queen Victoria, I think the sauna, they did a very small sauna in the changing rooms. But generally speaking, the free ones are more kind of up, a little bit more once you go up market. But certainly, I know on Regent, on Silversea they did. I'm thinking of the one I'm just back from. Explorer did. Viking is another one. They do have a nice sauna and ice room area, but it does, if you want the free ones, it does tend to be a little bit higher up. But do take a look at some of the Cunard ones. Certainly not on Cunard, but in the changing rooms, I do remember on Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth, they did have them. Didn't have them on Queen Anne. We had to pay to go to those. Let's have a look. JMLB 10,050. These are always hard ones to pronounce. So maybe I shouldn't even try and do it. First cruise in May 2026. Very exciting. I love it. Very excited when I see people with their first cruise. Holland America, Eurodam to Alaska. Thoughts on the onboard casino? Okay. The onboard casino Eurodam is pretty good. In fact, it's actually just been expanded recently. So when I did a group cruise last year on Eurodam, and they were actually running they had something like almost 100 casino comp people who were big casino players on that same sailing as us. It was almost 100. It wasn't quite 100. It's like 85 or something like that. But they've now expanded the casino. The casino so used to be in an area where the casino was near Billboard on Board, and then there was this bar lounge kind of area. That's now the bar part's still there, but the lounge areas they've expanded the casino, so it's a pretty big casino, and it's a pretty active casino. Eurodam it's got a pretty good casino, and as I said, it's just expanded. And certainly the fact that they did use it because the sailing wasn't that full, they would use it to bring a lot of their big casino players on board, suggests to me that is a good casino. So for the size of the ship, I think it's a pretty good casino. So Diane and Andrew here, which is great. I'll be catching up and seeing them when I'm there. Oh, great. So thanks very much for that, Diane and Andrew. They've stayed at the Hilton. It was great. That's funny. When I said it, I was ringing my bell. It was ringing my bell, ringing in my head, that I felt that someone had stayed there that I knew of. So that's great. Thanks for adding that. Mark Wood, good to see you here. How much bigger can the mega ships get over the next decade or so? Well, I really don't know. I mean, it's going to be an interesting one, because the challenge that mega ships have is sailing out of the US, which is where most of the mega ships sail out, out of Florida, because that's where they just get the pure volume. Under US law, under the Passenger Vessels Act, which people call the Jones Act, but it's actually not really the Jones Act. The Jones Act is something slightly different. Anyway, that's just the geek in me. But if you're sailing out of the US for a ship that is not built and manned by US people, you have to call on a foreign port. So the problem is, the bigger and bigger ships get is they just can't go anywhere. So some of those massive big ships, like the Icon, Star of the Seas, which are now up to sort of 7,000 passengers, if I remember correctly. So once you've got crew on, it's like 8,000-9,000 something people. They are so limited where they can go. They can get into Nassau. They can get into Perfect Day at Coco Cay. So at some point, they have to be able to call somewhere to be able to sail. So I wonder whether we've sort of reached kind of the maximum size. Obviously, a lot of it hinges on demand as well, but I suspect we're probably maxing out at where you can get to, both from a physical size. Bear in mind, you have to get, a lot of those ships are sailing 3-4 nighters. So you've got to have the volume of people to fill those ships, every couple of days, literally, and you've got to go to a foreign port. Those ships, the big ships, you can't really take into Europe as much, because a lot of those ports just can't cope. There's so few ports that can cope with them. You can't take them to many places into Asia. So that, I feel like we're probably coming to kind of a max out. But I've already said that years ago when it was 4,000. So I don't know. I don't know. The return life, I think I've probably answered this. Cruise prices, I mean, what's very interesting, what the cruise industry does is they will talk a lot, and you'll see they brief travel agents quite a lot on this, is comparing the cost of cruising versus going on a land-based resort trip. And you'll find that that is a big part of the pitch, that it's still cheaper, if you're a family, to go on a cruise than it is to take a family on a resort-based holiday. So I'm going to take a slug of water. So I don't think, so as a cruiser, we certainly grumble and not very happy with as we see cruise prices kind of growing. But in reality, their big focus is on new to cruise. Come back to guess the point. We're talking about these big ships and having to fill them. And actually, as a family or for people who are used to land-based, they're coming and looking at these and saying, well, actually, this is pretty good value for money with what I'm getting versus if I'm going land-based. So I think that's particularly in that more mass kind of space. So certainly we're not seeing people being priced out as yet. I mean, 4.5, certainly, I know inflation slipped a bit below it in the UK. I mean, that was in line with inflation. Now inflation is about 2 point something. I guess in the US, inflation's lower, so it's rising a bit above. So I mean, you're right. At some point, there will be kind of some flex. Now, because they use dynamic pricing, if people start to pull back from cruising, pricing will flex because they have the pricing basically moves up as demand moves up. So their price so prices used to be much more volatile than it is now because demand is so high. Prices are being pushed up by demand. The thing that I think we also need to watch, though, the Wu-Tang Life, is if you look at what cruise lines report, is they talk about growth in fares, absolutely, but they talk much more about the increase in onboard spend. So they are putting a huge emphasis on what people spend once they get on board. So you might be, in terms of prices, you might be talking the whole experience, but they are, they make a lot of noise about how successful they've been at getting people to spend more on board. So it's interesting how people think. Do they look at the headline price, which I assume most people do, because that's the hook, if you like, and people are spending more on board. Wire packages, especially, being a big part of that. So I don't know that we're seeing people being priced up, but I think the industry, the way it is, capacity filling ships, their pricing model is so sensitive, I guess, to that. I think we would see that. I think we would see that quite quickly. It's like Gary's wording, sticky out bits, peninsula, yes. Sherry, this is an interesting point. For those of you who don't know, what happened is, I guess the US increased quite significantly the charge, mostly aimed at freight ships calling into US ports. So the tariffs went up a lot. So what China did is, I guess because a lot of the freight ships are registered in Panama and all these other places. So so they couldn't really necessarily retaliate as much. So what they did is they've also dramatically increased some of the fares for cruise ships calling into Chinese ports. So a couple of them, like Oceania recently, cancelled calling to Shanghai because it was going to cost them something like, don't quote me on the number, but it was something like $400,000, $500,000 to call into the port. So they cancelled it. However, what's interesting is Spectrum of the Seas negotiated to get it down. So Spectrum of the Seas was able to negotiate with the Chinese authorities to get in. So I think what we're going to see is, definitely there's a risk. So if you're booking anything with a Chinese port in the short term, keep an eye on it. Certainly in the short term, but also I guess cruise lines, as Spectrum of the Sea, I guess Royal Caribbean showed, is there is some flex in the system. So hopefully cruise lines will react. I mean, I guess Riviera just didn't have the time or whatever, but I would have been very upset because Shanghai or the Chinese ports would have been absolutely there. But the only one that I've seen is Riviera, but I know that it's an active discussion at the moment. The Wu-Tang Life, why do Europeans wear Speedos instead of shorts to swim? Yeah, I guess it's a cultural thing. It's just people are much more comfortable with their bodies. I guess it's the same as topless sunbathing is much more of a thing in Europe. Certainly, on many beaches, many countries, women's sunbathing topless would be nothing. So I guess it is. Shipping companies are coming back more and more on service and amenities every year. Well, Robert, yes and no. I mean, certainly we've seen. You have to look at line by line in reality, but generally speaking, more things. Cruise lines have been looking at how do we reduce food waste. So, what implication does that have across the size of the menu, the range of the menus, for example? Some cruise lines, particularly in the mainstream side, have actively cut back. So, Norwegian a couple of years ago went to once a day service. A couple of other cruise lines have gone to once a day cabin service. Norwegian, for example, like many cruise lines, have introduced charges. If you order a second main course, they've stopped printing the daily program, saying, look, use your phone, use your app. If you want one, we'll give it to you. So there's definitely kind of a cutback in terms of price. So yes, there is absolutely kind of shaving back across the board. Now it's interesting because at the same time, sometimes when they've cut back, have put stuff back in, like Seabourn kind of slash back, they seem to be bringing stuff back a bit. Oceania kept chopping and changing what they're doing, and they seem to have said, okay, we've probably gone too far. But I think broadly speaking, yes. And I think one of the things I find very interesting with this is as established cruisers, we notice it because we're used to some of these things. But I know so many people going cruising who just think it's incredible. Like, I can't believe we had all this stuff. We're getting all this stuff and it's included in the fare. And new to cruise is a massive part of what cruise lines are targeting. New to cruise, very small percentage of people who have ever cruised. I think it's only like 3% of the travel industry or something bizarre. I can't remember the number, but a very small percentage of travelers have actually cruised. And when people get on, they don't know that 3 years ago you used to get service twice a day because they used to be in a hotel where you get it once a day or whatever. So that new target is much less sensitized to it than I guess we are. But the short answer is probably yes, I would say. Let me have a little slug of that. Hopefully we're doing well on churning through the questions. Body wheels. 1 week to embarkation on Queen Anne for the first time. Great. Laura, Cunard is staying in the Britannic Club. Anything I should prepare myself for? Itineraries, Madeira, Canary Islands, I guess. Okay. So if you're Laura Cunard, a couple of things is, first of all, Queen Anne is pretty different as a ship. If you've been on, Victoria Elizabeth or Queen Mary 2, it's a pretty different ship in terms of layout. Some of those iconic venues you may find a little bit underwhelming. So like the Queen's Room is not as grand as on any of the other rooms. The restaurants, the Britannia, now you're in Club, I'll talk about Club in a second, but the Britannia is not as grand as it is on the other ships. The decor is not as traditional Cunard-like. So it's quite an un-Cunard ship in many ways. I did in my review of Queen Anne, which if you haven't watched it, I'd encourage you to watch, is I talk about how at times you almost feel like Cunard have chartered this ship because it's so different. In terms of Britannia Club, now, if you've ever been in Britannia Club on the other ships, you will be surprised at how big Britannia Club is. It's a very big restaurant. It's much smaller. Obviously, if you're going on Queen Mary 2, it's a section of the main Britannia, but here it's a dedicated restaurant and it's a really big, so Britannia Club is a really big thing there. It's actually quite a nice restaurant. In terms of its look and feel, it's pretty nice. But I would say the main thing is just expect the ship to be very different. The cabins are quite different as well. A lot of people complain about storage, and I don't think it was massively bad. People complain about storage, but the cabins actually are very nice decor. Just less Cunard, yes. The program, though, you'll recognize is very similar. Not very similar, it's the same. Those would be my main things. But probably if you watch that video, there may be things that I've forgotten as well. Someone saying prestige capacity is now 822. Interesting. Just a reminder, write the word crew, write the word question so don't miss it. Damon Tomasi, I want to go on an African safari. So my suggestion would be, and I think someone made the point, is probably the best safari I've ever been on is Tanzania. By definition, I'm talking about doing a land-based trip. So Tanzania, I've done safaris in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and I would say that in Tanzania is probably the best safari. So I would look at Tanzania. Also, as Mark, who was here a bit earlier, he actually went at the iconic time which is when you have the migration, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of animals kind of moving and migrating. You can actually book some sort of roving roving safari units, tents that could follow the migration. But I would strongly recommend Tanzania. Now, if you do want to sort of link a safari to a cruise, you can go like some of the South African cruises, like I did on Silver Sea, but Norwegian does it, Azamara does it. They will do some safari excursions or pre and post safaris. But I would just watch out a little bit, because if you go on a cruise and then you go to the safari as an excursion, the problem is you only get into the safari parks sort of at 11 o'clock or so, maybe 10 o'clock. That's too late. The best animal viewing time is at dawn, as as the sun comes up, and dusk as it goes down. So that's not give you opportunity. So if you do want to link it to a cruise, do the safari as a pre or post, and probably don't do the ones in the Cape. We might actually, get up to Kruger or Sabi Sabi, but definitely, Hwange in Zimbabwe is great safari, Okavango and stuff in Botswana. But Tanzania for me is the best one to go. Again, just a reminder about the word question. Eric, what would happen if I showed up solo and some other companion was a no-show? Not a lot, because you wouldn't get any refund, because not a lot would happen. So you're not going to get your money back or anything like that. I mean, it's if a companion's not coming, it's worth doing it in advance, because you will get some money back. You'll get some port fees and stuff back. If you're only doing it once you arrive, you may struggle more for that. Now, depending on which cruise line you're on, of course, you may, you may have prepaid gratuities and stuff. But generally speaking, they're just going to go, oh, okay, fine. But it's better to do it first, just kind of from a courtesy perspective. But I'm not sure if there's any other, because once you're on board, as they're clearing immigration and stuff like that, when they leave, they'll have the manifest, because they do have no shows. Sometimes normally it's whole cabin no shows. The manifest is stuff they will clear with the authorities leaving, which is why you'll find people sometimes get really upset, because it'll say they'll arrive late to check in, and the ship's still there, and it's still there for an hour, but they're not allowed to board, because that whole departure process, there's a lot of paperwork and immigration and stuff that happens. So on your ticket, when it says you must have checked in by 4 o'clock, you must be there by 4, because that's when it's closed. So I've been on a cruise, in fact, honestly, on a Vista, where some people, it was maybe about 20 people. They arrived, we were there maybe 45 minutes before we actually set sail, and they were not allowed to board. But anyway, I'm getting slightly sidetracked. But then all the future immigration and port clearance is done based on who's on board. So it's worth telling people, because in reality, you'll have, if you're traveling with a companion, you've paid for 2 people. So you may as well just book it solo anyway, because you're either at worst going to pay the same amount. So for example, I'm doing quite a big cruise next year, which originally was booked for 2, for Mark and myself, and Mark can't come. And the difference in price with just me is literally, it's quite an expensive cruise. It's a 31-night cruise, was maybe $300, $400, something like that, which was basically port fees, because he's not going to be on board. And obviously we'll only pay 1 set of gratuities, for example. Brenda, thoughts on the quiet seas Mediterranean itineraries, pros and cons. So I've done a few of those. The main con is it's cold. So so it's just the weather's not great. So it can, like if you're going, February into even March, or you're going like October, November time, just before ships start moving, like doing repositionings. So I've done it at the beginning, I've done it at the end. Like I did a med on Norwegian Viva last year, and it was pretty miserable weather. So it's kind of grey and cold. All the ports, when I look at the photographs and stuff, I've got my big coat on and scarf and stuff. So it's more the weather is not great. Obviously, the pro is places aren't busy. So if you're going to Pisa or Florence or any of these really busy places, normally, it's not going to be that busy. Now, if you really don't like hot weather, so July, August is obviously manic busy in the Mediterranean, very hot, very sticky. Those would be the main kind of pros and cons. So if you're not as bothered from a weather perspective, and it's more you want to see the places and you'd rather see it quieter. Obviously, the pros, generally speaking, it's not as costly, basically. Yeah, I would say. Let's have a look. Jeffrey's here from Cruising for One, which is great. Jeff Leeson, we're taking Oceania from Rome, visiting Salerno, Messina, Corfu, Kotor, Split, and Zadar. Never been to Zadar. I think Zadar I'm doing on this My Windsor one, which I'm intrigued in, ending in Trieste. You spoke about Kotor last week. Any activity recommendations at the other stops? No, not really. Salerno, no. I'm trying to think Messina. I'm trying to think what I've done in Messina before. I've been to Messina and I've been to Corfu. I'm trying to think where the Temple of Colossus is. Is that Messina or Corfu? I'm showing my very bad geography. If one of those has got the Temple of Colossus, which I would go to, Corfu actually has a very nice. It must be in Messina, if I remember correctly. But Corfu has. I've actually done like the hop on hop off bus around Corfu. Some very nice beach spots. It takes you massive around the island, explore the city, etc. In Split, I actually just did a stroll around Split. I didn't do a lot of tours. I just toured around the town, which is quite a nice town. So I've done kind of more exploring thing. And Zadar I haven't been in. So I was pretty rubbish there, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. What I would recommend though, Jeff, is take a look at what'sinport.com. They are, for each of those ports, they will tell you where you're docking, and they will also suggest self-exploring and must do things to see and do. And they'll do a damn sight better job than I just did there. Let's have a look. UE68. What do you recommend for a first ever cruise for young couples 25 to 30 years old in Europe? Introverted, avoid large crowds, and quite food orientated. Okay, so my initial reaction, by the way, was going to be Virgin Voyages, because they are 18 plus only. So you're going to have a more adult crowd. Now, Virgin Voyages does have a reputation of being. People think Virgin Voyages is very party-like, but in reality, its average age is around 50 or so. But obviously, it gets a younger crowd and older crowd. But it's pretty upmarket. It has a really good range of food options. So they don't have a main dining room. They have lots of different food venues. I found the food really good on there. They have a Wave, which is kind of steakhouse. They have Korean barbecue. They have like a test kitchen. They have a Korean barbecue, Mexican, et cetera. So it's quite, and the advantage is not crazy expensive. So it's premium line, so it's the same sort of price as your Cunard, Celebrity, and so on. So that would be my first thought. The ships are big, but they're not massively big. And what's good about Virgin is there's lots of smaller venues, but there is going to be quite a lot of people on board. The other one that you might find you quite like is Celebrity on their newer ships, Edge, Apex, Ascent, Excel. And now again, they're quite big ships, but they are kind of a little bit more vibe. You'll get a much more kind of mixed crowd, and they do have quite a good range of dining, speciality, etc. If you wanted something that was really quiet, Viking, but I think you would find Viking too old for you, crudely speaking, because the average would be kind of well into their 60s. They're also 18 plus, but that would be, I would tend though to avoid like Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, which MSC, because they are big ships, much busier, much more bustling. The other thing you could look at, depending on your budget, now we're talking more budget wise, is if you took a look at, say, Azamara, for example, or Oceania. Now, Oceania have some small ships, which they are getting rid of the fleet, but Oceania, they make the claim of, the best cuisine at sea. Their new ships are very nice. They're 1,200 passengers. They're not massively big, but that's another one to look at. You would probably be definitely on the younger side on that ship. It's going to be, again, more kind of 50s, 60s inside. But Virgin is probably the one that would have kind of a good mix of stuff, for, kind of a more younger vibe about it. But it's more adults. You're not going to have kids and stuff. So I would certainly take a look at that. The short answer is no. Unfortunately, you're right. There have been quite a few norovirus outbreaks on cruise ships. There's been quite a lot on land as well, certainly here in the UK. I think what we're seeing, it's interesting, different lines do it differently, but the thing that's always impressed me when I go on Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, is they are really pushy about people washing their hands. They basically, you cannot get into the Windjammer on Royal Caribbean without going through this really narrow area where they have hand washing stations on the other side and crew that will not let you go into the Windjammer without washing your hands. So they do, it's interesting. You don't, I might be wrong, but I haven't seen things like Royal Caribbean and stuff with those issues as such. So I think it's about, unfortunately, making passengers behave better. I don't think we'll see going back to suit. Very few lines have ever had crew serving food in the buffet. Holland America, I mean, even Oceania has kind of dropped it. Holland America still do it, but I think, unfortunately, no. No, it would be my view. Dementor, sir, I've sort of answered that. Hopefully I'll answer that question on the safari side. So Heidi is, Heidi, yes, on Amsterdam from BA to Santiago, tips and things. Okay, so in terms of that, Heidi, Santiago, I guess you're going from Valparaiso, or I'm trying to remember the name of the port. I went from Valparaiso, but it's now the other ones. It's something Williams or something. So I've been to Santiago quite a few times, but I haven't really explored Santiago very much. So I don't have any great tips, unfortunately. But it is quite, I don't know whether you booked the included excursion, but transfer, because Santiago is quite far from the embarkation port. So if you haven't booked it through the cruise line and you're booking it, say, with a taxi, whatever, make sure they know where the cruise port is specifically. So in Valparaiso, which is, I think you're not likely to be going through, because Valparaiso is not the port they're using anymore. But it was a little bit tricky to get there. And I had to eventually, luckily I'd looked at it before. I looked in what's in port and stuff, and I had to tell him where to go. So that's the only really watch out there. So yes, have a great time. Let me know when you're on Amsterdam. I'm in Amsterdam from the 8th of March to the 8th of April. But I'm not on the route that's going down to the Antarctic bit. John, what's your opinion of Oceania Sirena? So Oceania Sirena is one of the R-class ships. It's the one that takes 700 passengers. These are pretty old ships. I quite like the R-class ships. I think they're a lot of character, but they haven't said what they're doing with Sirena yet, but they're getting rid of Insignia, which is a sister ship. They're getting rid of Regatta, which is now on a charter. They haven't said what they're doing with Sirena yet. These ships are, if you like a small kind of ship, the thing I would say is, if you're booking most of the cabins other than the suites, the bathrooms are really, really small, which is most people do not enjoy. I've done that with my partner. I've done an R-class ship by myself. By myself, the bathroom was fine. It is kind of small. I'd quite like them. They have the two specialty restaurants, the Italian and steakhouse. I quite like them, but the cabins are very small and the bathrooms are tiny, and it's an older ship. That would be my watch out with that. You've got the new ships, Riviera, Marina, and the newer ones, of course, with Vista and Allura, which are just more glitzy, more dining options, etc. But the advantage with Sirena is they tend to have slightly more interesting itineraries. Although I've seen they used to do Alaska and they used to do Japan, and it looks like they now use Riviera for that. Becky, no, I don't think the quality of entertainment has gone down on Princess. I actually think it's gone up, to be honest. So I had been on, I'd been on quite a few Princess ships, both before and just after the shutdown. And then I kind of I wasn't that keen on Princess. I thought they'd kind of lost the plot a little bit. I thought the food wasn't great. I thought the entertainment was so. Then this year I went on back on Sky Princess, on Sun Princess, and they have probably, of all of that premium line, so the Cunard, Holland America, Celebrity, they have the most packed entertainment program of all. It is absolutely jam-packed. They've definitely put more money into the production shows, but if you're into things like trivia, quiz shows, games, karaoke, bingo, those kind of things, they had such a packed program. I was just amazed at how much they had. I'm not a massive big fan of things like rock opera and those sort of shows. I'm in the minority. I wasn't mad about it, but they've definitely put more money into them. So I would say no would be my thought. So Sherry's got a tip: Innocents Abroad, good video about what they did in San Diego. So thanks for that. Dadabatic, do you always give a perfect 10 response? No, I don't. I know I do if it is a 10, but no, nothing's ever 10 in reality. I don't think anything's perfect ever. Just the nature of that. That's what the problem with the surveys. But I know how important the surveys are. I actually, when I do the end of cruise survey, I spend more time commenting on individuals than the scores. I mean, obviously, I will give good scores if there's good scores are worthy of it. Very unusual. I'm going to give it 10. I might give a 9 or something. But I actually spend much more time commenting on individuals who've made a difference, because I know how important that is for the individuals. The scores are important for management because they need that. And I know also if a restaurant or something doesn't get a great score, they can come under some pressure. But the naming the people is the thing. So I tend to focus a lot on that. I just saw Caroline made the point, Explorer Journeys. That's another one. That's a good one. I hadn't thought about. I forgot about Explorer Journeys. So Explorer Journeys is another good one for those 25 to 30 year olds. We have run out of time. I think I've answered most of the questions. A couple of questions I will have a look and see at the ones that I missed. So just to remind you that next Sunday, because I'm boarding cruise, I will be in New York. I will not be running a live, but I will be the week after that. I will post a reminder for everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for the fantastic questions, and have a great rest of the time. As I said, follow me on Instagram, Gary Bembridge, if you want to follow my trip. If you want even more, think about the Patreon thing, if that appeals. Have a great time, and thanks for joining me, even with these funny old time changes. Take care.